A swinging leg held up the open box lid and turned it into a tabletop. And Abilene. What happened to Abilene? It was the first of the Wild West towns, and maybe the wildest of them all, with saloons and pistol-packing cowpunchers raring for a good time. A town like that needed a marshal, and Abilene got the most famous one of all. James Butler Wild Bill Hickok. Hickok had once been a bad hombre himself, a gambling man who had 2 barrel-handled pistols, and was known as the fastest draw in the West. He could shoot the hat off a man and keep the hat in the air with his bullets, and when it finally dropped it would be rimmed with a circle of bullet holes. At least that was the story he told. Hickok was a sharp dresser who wore a coat with satin lapels, patted his long hair in the middle, and slicked it and his mustache with bear grease. Wild Bill was paid a big salary, $150 a month, for keeping law and order in Abilene. He did a fair job for a while, although most of the time his office was at a gambling table. Then he shot 2 people. He'd done that before, but it just happened that one was his deputy. That was too much for the good folk of Abilene. They got rid of Hickok and the cattle market too. Abilene settled down and became respectable. After that, the cowboys and their longhorns headed for the new towns of Wichita and Dodge City. About 1875, Dodge City became the main railhead for shipping cattle eastward. Most say it was even a wilder place than Abilene, and its peace officers, Bat Matterson and Wyatt Earp, well, you should read about them. But by the end of the century, when railroads crisscrossed the land and barbed wire fenced in it, the heyday of the wild cow towns was over. Calamity Jane. No one ever knew how many of Calamity Jane's stories were true and how many were tall tales. No one much cared. She was a good storyteller and no ordinary woman, even in those frontier days. She was Martha Jane Canary, and at age 13 already an expert rider when her family headed west. It was a 5-month trip, and she spent it exploring and hunting. It was a good thing she did. When her parents died a year and a half later, she could take care of herself. Calamity Jane claimed to have been a gold miner, a nurse, a Pony Express rider, an Army scout, an Indian fighter, and a cattle hand. Now that is what she said. Some people say all of it is true, and some say none of it is, including her name. No question, she was a well-known woman of the Wild West and a friend of Wild Bill Hickok, and a drunk. How did she get her name, Calamity Jane? Well, there are so many stories about that, it isn't worth the bother to tell them. Do you know what calamity means? It describes her. We do know that at 23 she joined a geological expedition to the Black Hills, and at 24 she was the only woman among 1,500 men in an expedition that headed from Fort Laramie to fight the Sioux. The major cattle trails from Texas to railroad towns more than 400 miles north led through thick grass and good water sources for cattle. A long drive could take 3 months. Dodge City, Kansas was a major railhead for shipping cattle eastward.